Hi, welcome to It's Like This podcast, your common sense mental and spiritual talk show. My name is Dr. Eugene Kim, a dual board certified psychiatrist from Texas. In this podcast, I explain mental and spiritual concepts with fun analogies, real stories, and positive message so you can not just survive, but thrive. My goal for you is to gain understanding, acceptance, and healing so that you can know your worth and live the life that you are meant to live. If you want that as much as I do, hit that subscribe button and let's listen to today's episode. In this episode, we will be kind of entering the latter phase of trauma breakdown, and I will be talking about steps that we need to take to reclaim your life when traumatic events happened. So I actually wanted to release this episode after the conversation that I had with Jenny Lee, because that episode was kind of that percolating episode about, talking about cultural trauma or trauma in your family and steps that we can take to kind of undo those cycles and kind of reclaim your life from that history of generational trauma. And that really helped me kind of finish and make this episode content complete. So in the trauma breakdown 2 episodes prior, we talked about traumatic events, what are the definitions of trauma, what are the components of traumatic events that really changes our life's course, and really talked about the spiritual implications of traumatic events. And trauma leaves us wondering, what do I deserve? Did I deserve this such evil event in my life? Do I deserve hope and healing? And in this episode, I'm going to be going through the steps and process of healing after traumatic events. Personally, I believe that no one deserves trauma, abuse, or neglect, but I know that it happens quite frequently. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about steps of healing and growth after traumatic events so that will eventually lead you to freedom. So I wanted to kind of mention a few caveats about this process. Number one, you cannot rush it. I'm a person of utmost efficiency. So when I was going through my, healing process, I dug deep into my wounds really fast, hoping that will get me faster to healing. But guess what? It didn't. At times, it made it worse. It made my emotions like roller coaster so intense that really affected, how I was parenting my kids or how I was relating with my husband. So that was when I reached out to get help, like professional help. I needed to pace myself because I never knew how to pace myself. So I needed someone to slow me down and adequately finish each step. So I want you to learn from my mistakes and please get professional help when you're going through this process. My second caveat is that you cannot skip a step. You cannot rush to step 4 if you have not completed step 1, 2, 3. Again, I've done it before and it backfired on me. So please learn from my mistakes and get a professional help who can guide you step by step. And third, it kind of might sound like it's kind of going against the step 2, but all of these steps can happen at the same time. And also it can be repeated in layers. And I think as I'm explaining the 1, 2, 3, it might kind of make sense at the end of it all. But give yourself grace to accept the emotions and thoughts and processes as it arises. It might be overwhelming and it might be step 1, 2, 3 together at the same time. But as you kind get the hang of it, you'll be more and more comfortable to handle the intensity of these emotions. So let's go to the steps. Number 1 is grieve adequately. And I emphasize on adequately because sometimes I think, for the sake of time, I say, oh, I grieved, I got it, moving on. But I really didn't know the art of like knowing what was adequate grieving. So, I'm going to just give you kind of tips and tricks that I learned, in my training or how I'm treating my patients or even going through my own stuff. So practically, you probably would need to make a timeline of all the traumatic events that happened in your life. And I would say give yourself full freedom to name anything trauma. Granted, you can call it big letter T trauma or small letter T trauma. You're making your own timeline. It doesn't have to meet these certain criterias. This is your life. And if you think that you need to grieve it, just write it on the timeline. It doesn't matter. And also, I would say that in that timeline, put major life events too. Even good events can be very stressful, and it can kind of help you note the patterns of what it was like. So, in that timeline, not only just trauma, but major life events. What do I mean by grieving? Grieving is not just going through the painful memories of the past. Sometimes grieving is for past events, but also present events, like how that past event affected you, and also future events, like future of like lost potential of the relationship. And this is kind of important, a lot of times because if a parent child had pretty traumatic, relationship, and let's say the child has their own kid, for in your healing journey, you might have to cut off or, the relationship is less than best. And you might have to grieve for your child to not have that healthy, loving, present grandparents. So this is what I mean by grieving for the lost potential of a relationship. And also grieving for your lost past efforts that never fruitioned. It does really suck when you put your effort and time and resources into something and never see the fruit of it, never see the product of it. It's kind of lost into the thin air. And you have to grieve that because a lot of your energy was spent to sustain or heal that relationship, and it never happened. So grieve that as well. Grieve for that little you going through these events. A lot of times when I talk to, my patients who kind of went to trauma, they kind of stop at, yeah, it was sexual assault. Yeah, it happens. It happened, or it happens to everybody. And they kind of sterilize it a little bit of not describing any further than generic terms. And in that grieving process, a lot gets lost. So this is a pretty intense exercise, and I do recommend, this is why I recommend professional therapy, but grieving and going back to little you, putting yourself in that little you shoes, not knowing a lot of things that you know now, not being aware of a lot of things that you know now. What was that event like for you? And it adds really color to it, it adds depth to it, and this is what, adequately grieving might sound like. And also, grieving without judgment or minimizing or calculating how intense that trauma was. A lot of times when somebody went through traumatic events and they, shared that traumatic events to a family member or friends, you most likely you have been measured, your traumatic events could have been measured or quantified to somewhat sense. Like you might hear like, oh, that's not the worst thing that could have happened. It could have been worse, or imagine what happens to kids in Africa, so it all became kind of relative terms to the point that your traumatic event doesn't really matter. But in this time when you're grieving adequately of your own life events, there could be a lot of narrations or voices inside your head telling you like this is no big deal, like why are you making a big deal. Kind of tune that out a little bit, and I would say explore with your therapist, like where did that voice kind of come from, because a lot of times those voices are in our heads for us to survive, and just be tough and be stronger, because grieving, in front of people or even to yourself, meant that you're weak. So grieve adequately without judgment or minimizing. And what does this grieving adequately process, why is that important and why is it the first step? Grieving adequately, I believe, is it puts the kind of emotional life playing field evenly. A lot of times when traumatic events happen, we talked about how it has a spiritual implication of did I deserve this? Or why did this happen to me? Like, do I matter? There's a lot of confusion here. But when you grieve adequately, it kind of answers that spiritual question of, do I matter? Yes, I do matter. Did I deserve this? No, you did not deserve it, because I'm grieving for that event that happened to you. So in a sense, it's reclaiming the value of yourself, your emotions, your journey, and your reactions and actions that happen of it. Now, some people might be kind of like, well, is that enabling selfishness and look at me, like attention seeking behavior? I think it's just kind of resetting the life potential for you and everybody, because, like I said, I don't think trauma and abuse and neglect should happen to anyone, but it happens. So, for those that happened, I think adequate grieving would set the record straight to the ideals that abuse and neglect should not happen. And another question to kind of reset the record of everybody's worth is, imagine if what you went through, like traumatic life events happened to your loved ones, wouldn't you grieve adequately for them? And the truth is that your worth as a human being is just the same as the other person. So again, this is not attention seeking. We always have to compare to those who have less or those who went through a worse trauma. I don't think that's true. I think grieving adequately just sets the record straight that ideally nobody should go through what you or someone else who went through abuse went through. So I think grieving adequately answers that spiritual question of, what do I deserve? And I think you deserve abuse, neglect, and trauma free life. And that's ideal for everyone, for you and the people next to you, and even people of your perpetrator who went through trauma themselves. So I think grieving adequately, focusing on you and what you went through, it just sets the record straight that in the ideal world, nobody should be going through what you went through. Now, second step is setting boundaries. And boundaries is like, it's like popular word nowadays, and I'm glad that it is, because I think we can always use some more boundaries, but sometimes it kind of gets stretched, to like enabling unhealthy coping skills and stuff like that. But what do I mean by setting boundaries? And it's marking your safe space. For a person who went through traumatic events, especially at early stage, you really didn't have a safe space, because even if you thought that you had a safe space and said, hey, I got abused, you got gaslighted, or you got told like, oh, that's not abuse. That's just the way it is, right? So there's really no safe space when you are a victim of trauma. So setting your safe space is also an art, and there's many ways to go about it. And I'm going to be kind of mentioning some of the options of setting boundaries. First is going no contact with the perpetrator, or you can use the gray rock method, making minimal contact, not giving emotional effort into the relationship. So if they're like, wanting to talk about, their life or something, you just kind of say, oh, yeah, that's cool. Just kind of emotionally removing yourself from the relationship. Is limiting the duration and frequency of conversations or meeting them. Or is no longer being intimate, not thinking that you owe them to update them on the important stuff and daily stuff, or involving them in this decision making process for your life. It's also saying no, or you don't treat me like that. It would be making statements like that. One of my patients, we were talking about boundaries. He kind of mentioned, I'm kind of building myself a bubble. It's a comfort zone, so I don't like to talk to anybody and go out to social setting, and I know that I should kind of come out of this bubble. And I kind of took that metaphor and I kind of told him, well, I think we should all have bubbles. We should all have our safe space to relax and process, kind of what's happening. But over time, as you get better, these bubbles should be porous, as of they should have holes in them, so that you can kind of allow, other people's influence you, and you kind of reach out and you socialize and connect with other people. And over time, it will be changing. And that sensitivity of what you let in and what you let out will be controlled, depending on how well you are, becoming. So setting boundaries, so it's kind of reclaiming the safe space that you never had. So grieving adequately was a first step, and that really answers the question of, we are setting the bar of ideals of, I deserve trauma-free life, I deserve abuse-free life, I deserve a neglect-free life just like anyone else, including our perpetrators, right? So we're kind of setting the bar high of what the potential and ideal is for everybody. Now you're resetting the record to stop the cycle of things being taken away from you by setting boundaries. So let's say, that your husband hits you all the time. Instead of letting him hit you, now you're setting the boundaries of removing yourself from the home, seeking help, and saying, you don't hit me like that, right? So setting boundary is just stopping the cycle. It's a very tangible, it's very real, practical action of this cycle of trauma and neglect and abuse will not continue. And what it leads to is kind of like building a fence. And you're going to see the reactions of perpetrators or even other people who are on the sidelines react to you building a fence. And you build a fence not just for giggles, you build a fence, for other people to respect, right? And this is going to be a very difficult step, especially that if there was no fence, in between two houses. Now, third step of this healing process is actually to heal yourself by parenting yourself. When patients with traumatic events, history come to me, I already sense when they come in that they are tired. They're really tired because they've been carrying this burden, maybe to prove their worth, after traumatic event, or to prove that they're not like the perpetrators in any shape or form. So there's a lot of pressure that they've been carrying their whole life, and they kind of come to me at different stages in the 20s, 40s, or even 60s. A lot of times, I feel like they have already done the grieving part, and they have already done the setting the boundaries part, but they have really difficulty with healing part. And I think the reason why is that there's not a parent voice, a loving parent voice inside your heart and inside your head that kind of sets the record straight. You can stop the future trauma, but what do you do with all the, consequential hurts and wounds in your heart? If a trauma happened by your parent when you're a child, a lot of times you were told and you were placed in a position where you had to be a parent to your parents. For example, a kid with, alcoholic parents who are not really functioning or maybe barely functioning, kind of keeping the roof over your head and giving you food and clothes, but emotionally they were not there. They might have been abusive or just neglectful. A child had to parent himself at a young age to comfort himself, to give him motivations to live, to encourage or praise. Or sometimes, of course, child cannot adequately do all of that for himself, so they live with less than that. So a lot of times, child had to grow up and they don't know what loving parent voice is like because child's voice in that stage was the best voice that they had. And I want to just pause here and just kind of comment on the being tired and fatigue um, of a person that went through traumatic event. When you are a child and you had to parent your parents and understand them and empathize with them and take care of them in any shape or form without adequate training or even role models, right? You're just kind of makeshift parenting the parent figures that were supposed to parent you. And then you kind of grow up with lack of love and warmth and cushion and comfort that everybody needed to have during their childhood. You're tired, and now you're dealing with lack of childhood and lack of parenting in your adulthood, and it's really hard to just stop and hear you have to parent yourself. And I think this is where it's key to kind of go back to step number 1 and adequately grieve the childhood that you never had. And I think this is a really important step to kind of cure that fatigue, just to relax and just give yourself grace. And then I think when you're kind of charged up a little bit, I think you can go to the healing, actually healing part. So this is what I told one of my patients is that you've been carrying a lot of burdens that was your parents to carry and that was yours to carry. But what we're going to do in this session is we're going to look and explore all the stones that are in your backpack. And some might have your mom's name on it, some might have your dad's name on it, some might have your name on it. But you know what? We're going to throw away the responsibilities and the consequences of your parents from your backpack, and you're only going to carry what is yours. And 100% guarantee the new load is going to be so much lighter than what you've been carrying. So when you're in that situation and when you're healing, it's important, let's say that, you're an adult now, maybe 20s. You kind of know what healthy, loving parent voice is like. It might be awkward to hear, but it's important to kind of validate your feelings and narratives. Instead of that voice, we already talked about like, oh, there's worse things, that could happen. Instead, stop that voice and be that loving parent voice for yourself. Like, I'm sorry that happened. That should not have happened. And you know what? Your truth, your narrative stands here. So talk to yourself like that. And giving yourself options that you're okay with. So, for example, let's say that your parent was a perpetrator and they're old and, they're sick. You might be in a weird position where you never got parented, but now legitimately you might have to parent your elderly parents, who abused you. What would, it's going to kind of sound confusing, but what are some loving parent voice who will help you navigate these tough choices? I would say kind of things like, well, what are some of the options that you're okay with? What are some things that you're not okay with? And giving yourself options and just choosing the options that you're okay with. Don't extending yourself past what you're able to give, or focus and pay attention to your needs and wants. So for example, I'm going to be making an announcement, but I'm going to be, focusing on, being a mom and I wanted a gym membership so that I can kind of get away from kids and like, work on my health and stuff too. And, there's plenty of options for gyms, but I wanted to kind of splurge myself to get a nicer gym membership. And at this point of my healing journey, I can allow myself to have a little splurge. And I think before me would have been really hard to justify that kind of splurge for myself. So, focusing and paying attention to what you want and what you need, that's very important. And that's what loving parent would do. So as you heal and parent yourself and understanding that you deserve the loving parent voice, you'll be amazed at over time, just like I shared, what you allow yourself to have, to feel, to want, to feel like you deserve. And this is the part where grieving adequately sets the bar of ideals for every human being on earth, including yourself. Setting boundaries stops the trauma, stops the deficit that you're feeling and you were experiencing. Healing and parenting yourself is kind of that hard work where you're building assets, emotional assets, where you're no longer in the negative, you're no longer in the debt part. You're building yourself equity, emotional equity, by allowing yourself to be parented by yourself. Now, important part here, and we'll talk about in the next step, is that you're parenting yourself. You do not ask somebody else to parent you. And this is the cycle that continues traumatic cycle. Okay, this is what I mean. When a person is abused, let's say that physical abuse by domestic violence, right? They go relationship to relationship seeking that healing and protection and parenting from someone else. And a lot of times, this is very overwhelming responsibility for the new partner to fulfill. And actually, I would even add that it's not his or her responsibility to do that. I think it is your responsibility to parent yourself, to heal, and to get help. And there's a lot of experts and professional help that you can get. And I think this is very important. They are the experts and professionals to guide you to, include this loving parent voice inside your head instead of that critical, self-negating voice. So don't expect other people to parent yourself. It is a hard work, but only you can do it for you to be fully independent. So imagine this is that, if you're in a debt, right, you're not going to get another debt and loans to fill that debt because that cycle will continue. That will be kind of foolish cycle of, replacing one loans with the other. This is just as foolish emotionally when you're trying to heal and parent yourself from other relationships. It has to be relationship with yourself. So last step is forgive to be free. So when I was kind of going through the healing journey, I saw a lot of limitations of kind of, secular approach of, trauma work. And I'm not saying all secular work does this, but when I kind of listened to that videos of no contact and gray walling, gray stoning, you know, you feel better because you're no longer being abused or neglected involuntarily. But I was just kind of like, so what does this leave me? And sometimes, re-entering that memories of trauma just made me more mad and upset. It didn't really feel free. So I think I kind of reached the conclusion where I had to kind of shift the gears a little bit and enter into forgiving. And I just want to clarify on a definition of forgiveness. Okay. When people told me, oh, you need to forgive, that really used to make me so mad. And I think it makes a lot of people mad when they hear it when they're not ready. Okay. People get defensive, and I got defensive. And things I hear and I said is, I did forgive them and they continue to use me or abuse me. I did empathize with what they went through to understand what they did. But where's justice in that? Or they won't change or they won't even apologize. So how can I forgive them? And I totally get it. I've been there. Okay. But I think what I didn't know was the definition of forgiveness. Okay. Forgive in the Bible is not actually continue the abuse or neglect. It's not just to turn the other cheek and let them abuse you because they don't know better. And I was told, and by many, many people, many YouTube videos, that this was the term. Okay. But actually, it's not. It's actually a business technical term. It is to forgive or erase the past debt that they owe you. Okay. And let's kind of explore that definition because I think it'll be very important for us to really forgive. So, a few things here. They owed you. So, they did you wrong. If you were going by black and white, balance sheet of records of wrongs, they did you wrong. And I'm not saying that they didn't do you wrong. They took away something from you that they shouldn't have or they couldn't pay back, right? So, let's just be clear, they did wrong you. Transaction of forgiveness is not really dependent on the ability for that person to pay the debt. So you're not erasing because they couldn't pay it, or you're not erasing even though they can pay it. I think the fact that you're erasing the debt has less on the person who owes you, but more on the person that is erasing the debt. And I'll definitely explore this later. Okay. It's a one-sided transaction to erase the past debt. So past, okay? This is not a jail-free card for all future debt and loans that they're going to take from you. If someone borrowed your money from you and they didn't pay, and let's say that you forgave them and you erased their debt, and they ask for money again, if you lend more money to them, that's on you. It's not them, okay? So again, forgiveness is erasing the past debt, okay? But why would you want to erase a past debt anyways, okay? And this motivation can be very personal. And, I would like to say that, there could be a lot of personal reasons why you're going to forgive, but don't let it be manipulation or guilt, because that is a horrible way to enter into forgiveness. And that's not really forgiveness, okay? But whatever your motivation to forgive is, you have to be emotionally, financially independent and stable enough to erase the debt. Like you don't need that money to make your living. So that's why you're able to erase the debt. So this is like really cool thing about active forgiveness. Active forgiveness a lot of times was told that it's a to-do step, right? You have to forgive. You have to do the forgiving, okay? But I don't think forgiveness should be just like a checklist to-do thing. It actually is a result of healed heart. So like I mentioned, you're able to forgive because you don't need that money that they borrow from you. You don't need that apology or righting their wrongs. They could think bad of you or never change. But that doesn't change your balance, bank balance of emotional stability and quality of life. They could manipulate you again or try to gaslight you to borrow more money from you. But you act out of grounded, business wise, sound mind, not your emotions of guilt or being manipulated. Okay. And you could even give them more money. If they need the money, you can give them more resources, but it's going to be charitable, freely given money with no strings attached, no more IOUs, no more record keeping, just you giving your resources, whether it's time, effort, or energy, because you can afford to lose it. So again, act of forgiveness is not an act. It's actually a result of healed, stable heart. You don't need that apology. You don't need that money. You don't need that, sense of justice from them. You already got it because you're good. Your emotional bank account is full. You're independent. You're making the right decisions out of your, executive function, not those weird strings attached emotional state. So see how free this sounds. I know you can get there and I know that you will. They're not the target to get your money back. You're not going to lend them any more money, but you're not going to ask them for money anymore, okay? Because you're going to build your bank account slowly but surely, and it's going to be your emotional bank account. You're going to be sound, you're going to be independent, and you're going to be free to share because you're going to have surplus. And it's a hard work of prioritizing yourself and being aware of yourself and doing the hard work with the expert and professionals who have done this work many, many, many times before with other clients. I really want you to prioritize your healing process and get the help that you need. Okay? So, in summary, it's like this. We talked about the 4 steps of healing after traumatic events happened. Is to grieve adequately, set boundaries and marking your safe space, heal and parenting yourself, and forgive to be free. So, thank you so much for staying until the end of this episode. I really hope that you felt that sense of hope that I have for you, and this is possible. And let me just tell you, in my life, for me to even say this, I could not have imagined me embodying this points like a few years ago, even a few months ago, okay? And I'm embodying it, I'm living it, and I know that it's possible for you. So if you need help, just reach out to restoropsychiatrymd@gmail.com or just reach out to your local therapist or psychiatrist in your area that you will really vibe well with. So don't give up on the hope. You deserve that healing and you can get there. So thank you so much and have a great day.